I would like, obviously, for them to be found, and for me to be cleared of this.
A mother and child vanish without a trace. Weeks pass. No calls, no sightings, no answer.
Like seriously, just fucking slap me on the ground and it's like, yeah, you're under arrest for homicide. Great, thanks guys.
Then, deep in the wilderness west of Calgary, their bodies are found. Hidden, buried, forgotten. Jasmine Lovett was 25 years old. A devoted mother. A young woman with dreams. Her daughter, Aliyah Sanderson, had just started to walk, to laugh, to explore the world around her. They should have had a lifetime ahead of them. Instead, their story ended in the dirt of a remote forest. The man responsible? Robert Leeming, a British national. A man who had shared a home with them. A man who would soon sit in a courtroom, staring down the consequences of his actions. Tonight, we're walking through the tangled web of this case. The relationships, the lies, the moments that led to a mother and child losing their lives. What really happened behind closed doors? What details were never revealed in court? Stay with us, and when you hear something that doesn't add up, leave a comment below. Welcome to the channel. If you think you've heard it all, think again, hit that subscribe button, and stay with us as we break down this case, because the truth isn't always what it seems. Jasmine Lovett wasn't someone who made enemies. She wasn't the kind of person you'd ever expect to see in a headline like this. She was young, full of life, and completely devoted to her daughter, Aliyah. She grew up in Alberta, surrounded by family who adored her. They remember her as someone who never hesitated to help others. Always smiling, always planning for the future. When she found out she was pregnant with Aliyah, everything changed, but in the best way possible. Motherhood gave her purpose. She worked hard to build a stable life, to make sure her little girl had everything she needed. Aliyah Sanderson was just 22 months old, still discovering the world, still learning new words, still reaching for her mother's hand when she felt unsure. She loved music. She would dance, arms flailing, giggling at her own moves. She followed Jasmine everywhere, watching her, learning from her. They were inseparable. But being a single mother wasn't easy. Jasmine had bills to pay, responsibilities piling up. She needed a safe place to raise her daughter. That's when she met Robert Leeming, a man who on the surface seemed willing to help. Leeming was older, British, a mechanic. He had a house, a spare room. He offered Jasmine and Aliyah a place to stay, a solution to at least one of her worries. Some saw it as a generous act. Others wondered why a man like him would want a young mother and child moving into his home. At first, everything seemed normal. Jasmine went to work, took care of her daughter, and went about her daily life. But there were things she didn't share with everyone. Conversations she never repeated. Worries she kept to herself. Friends noticed small changes. Jasmine wasn't as talkative. She canceled plans more often. She brushed it off, saying she was tired, busy with work, focused on Aliyah. But was that the truth? And then, one day, she stopped responding altogether. What happened inside that house? What made a mother and child disappear overnight? And why, when people started asking questions, did Robert Leeming act like nothing had changed? The last time anyone saw Jasmine and Aliyah alive was April 16, 2019. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it was already too late. Robert Leeming wasn't a man people noticed right away. He didn't stand out in a crowd. He wasn't particularly charming or memorable. To most, he was just another face, another man living an ordinary life. He was born in Stoke-on-Trent, England, but Canada became his home. 6 years before Jasmine Lovett and her daughter vanished, he moved to Calgary, hoping for a fresh start. He worked as a mechanic, spent time with his dogs, and told people he enjoyed the outdoors. At first glance, nothing seemed off. He lived in a modest house. He wasn't struggling financially. He wasn't caught up in anything illegal, at least not that anyone knew of. But the more people learned about him, the more they started to question who he really was. He met Jasmine through an online rental listing. She needed a place to live. He had space. It seemed like a simple arrangement. A mother and her child moving in with a single man. Some might have questioned it, but Jasmine saw it as a way to keep her daughter safe and secure. At first, they got along. He liked having company. She appreciated the stability. But things shifted. Friends noticed that Robert started acting as if Jasmine was more than just a tenant. He told people they were dating. She never said the same. He insisted they were together, yet Jasmine never introduced him as her boyfriend. She had been clear this was about convenience, nothing more. But to him, that wasn't enough. Over time, the stories about Robert began to surface. Neighbors heard arguments, muffled voices behind closed doors. Friends recalled moments where Jasmine seemed tense around him. She never said she was afraid, but she also never spoke about him much at all. Then there was the drinking. He never hid the fact that he liked his alcohol. He would brag about how much he could handle. The more he drank, the looser his words became. Some remember him making comments about Jasmine that didn't sit right. Controlling, possessive, as if she was his. And then there was Aliyah, a 22-month-old child, full of life and energy. She adored her mother. She wanted to be held, comforted, loved. And Robert? He had no patience for her. Friends recall hearing him complain about the noise, the crying, the interruptions. To him, a toddler was an inconvenience. Something changed in the weeks leading up to their disappearance. Jasmine had been talking about moving out. She was looking for a new place, one where she and Aliyah could live on their own. But before she could leave, she disappeared. And Robert? He carried on like nothing had happened. He told people they had gone on a trip. He even texted from Jasmine's phone to make it seem like she was still alive. For weeks, he lied. By the time the truth came out, the bodies had already been buried. The man who claimed to care about them had made sure they would never be found. At least, that's what he thought. But the truth has a way of surfacing. And Robert Leeming wasn't as careful as he believed. April 16, 2019, a Tuesday evening in Calgary's Cranston neighborhood. Nothing seemed unusual. The streets were quiet. Families settled in for the night. But inside Robert Leeming's home, something was about to go horribly wrong. Jasmine Lovett and her daughter, Aliyah Sanderson, were seen alive for the last time. There were no frantic calls, no cries for help, no signs of distress, at least none that the outside world could hear. But something happened in that house, and after that night, Jasmine and Aliyah were never seen again. Robert, however, didn't disappear. The next day, he went about his life as if nothing had changed. For the next few days, anyone trying to reach Jasmine would get a text response. But something fell off. The replies were short, unlike the way she usually wrote. Her mother, her friends, everyone who knew her, felt the same unease. They asked where she was. The responses were vague, busy, tired, spending time with Aliyah. But no one heard her voice. No one saw her. Meanwhile, Robert made sure to be seen. He went out for drinks, ran errands, and kept up appearances. He even smiled at neighbors as he walked past. But behind closed doors, there were things he didn't account for. That Saturday, April 20th, 2019, neighbors noticed smoke rising from Robert's backyard. He was burning something, a fire that lasted for hours. It wasn't unusual for people to burn yard waste, but this fire? It was different. A neighbor later said the flames were high, too high for something as simple as branches or leaves. No one thought much of it at the time. But later, when the truth came out, that fire would be remembered. What was he trying to destroy? 7 days had passed. No calls, no visits, no posts on social media. Jasmine's family knew something was wrong. She would never go this long without contacting them. They reported her and Aliyah missing. The police started asking questions. They checked Jasmine's usual places, her job, her friends' homes, daycare centers. But there was nothing. No trace of her or Aliyah. Then they knocked on Robert Leeming's door. Robert didn't seem nervous when they spoke to him.
I would like, obviously, for them to be found, and for me to be cleared. like seriously, like just fucking slap me on the ground and it's like, yeah, you're under arrest for homicide.
He casually told officers that Jasmine had left on April 18th. Said she had plans to go to the mountains for a few days. He even let reporters interview him. On camera, he shrugged off concerns, saying, "I'm innocent." They left. That's all I know. But the details didn't add up. He said Jasmine had taken a cab, but there was no record of it. He said she had packed bags, but no one saw her leave. He said he had nothing to hide, but there was something buried miles away that would say otherwise. As more time passed, the Calgary police issued a public appeal. They released photos of Jasmine and Aliyah, asking for any information. Flyers were posted. Volunteers searched nearby areas. The news spread across Canada. People started looking at Robert differently. The way he kept talking, the way he insisted he had nothing to do with their disappearance, it didn't sit right. The police were watching him, but they needed proof. May 6, 2019, Robert had no idea that undercover officers were following him. He didn't realize that every move he made was being documented. Then they caught the break they needed. That night, he led them to a remote area west of Calgary, a wooded spot far from the main roads. He thought no one was watching. He was wrong. Investigators uncovered two shallow graves. Jasmine Lovett, Aliyah Sanderson, buried side by side, their bodies covered with dirt, hidden away as if they were meant to be forgotten. But the question remained, what happened inside that house on April 16th? What led to the final moments of a mother and child? And why did Robert Leeming think he could get away with it? Before we continue with the heartbreaking story, I need to pause for a moment. If you're watching this video right now, chances are you know someone, a friend, a family member, or maybe even yourself who's dealing with a difficult relationship situation. You might see the signs but feel helpless about what to do. Here's what I want you to do right now. If this story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and share this video. Because somewhere out there someone needs to hear this story. Someone needs to know they're not alone. The more we talk about these situations, the more lives we might save. Drop a heart emoji in the comments. The search for Jasmine Lovett and Aliyah Sanderson had stretched for weeks. Their faces were everywhere, on posters, in the news, on social media. Family, friends, and strangers held on to hope that maybe, just maybe, they would be found alive. But on May 6, 2019, that hope was shattered. Robert Leeming had been under surveillance for days. The police were patient, watching his movements, listening to his words, waiting for him to make a mistake. They didn't need a confession. They needed something stronger. Proof. Evidence that he couldn't explain away. And then, one night, Robert took a drive. A long, quiet drive west of Calgary. The police followed, unnoticed, keeping their distance. He parked near a wooded area, far from the main roads, far from where anyone would casually stumble across him. He got out of the car, walked a familiar path, stood in one spot longer than the others, looking down, thinking. That was all the police needed. The next morning, officers arrived at that exact location, digging through the dirt, searching for what they already suspected was there. Then something. A piece of fabric. A sign that the ground had been disturbed. They kept digging. And then finally they saw it. Two shallow graves. Jasmine Lovett, 25 years old. Aliyah Sanderson, 22 months old. Buried side by side. The weight of the moment was unbearable. Officers on the scene had to pause, some stepping away to collect themselves. No amount of training could prepare them for this. A mother and daughter, hidden in the dirt, discarded as if their lives hadn't mattered. But they did. And now, their killer had nowhere left to run. When their bodies were taken in for examination, the truth of what had happened inside Robert Leeming's house on April 16th became clear. Jasmine had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. The same for Aliyah. The details were horrific. The violence unimaginable. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated. Robert didn't just kill them. He tried to erase them. The fire in his backyard days after their disappearance. Was he burning evidence? Blood-stained clothing? Something else? The way he texted from Jasmine's phone. Was he hoping to delay the investigation? To buy himself more time? And most disturbing of all, why kill Aliyah? She was a toddler. A child. Innocent. Defenseless. When the police confronted Robert with what they had found, his response was cold. No outburst. No denial. Just a shrug. As if it was all inevitable. He was arrested immediately. Charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. But there was one question left. Would he finally tell the truth? Or would he continue to lie until the very end? By the time Robert Leeming was officially charged, the public already had their verdict. In the eyes of many, he was guilty. There was no doubt. But the law required more than just suspicion. It needed undeniable proof. On May 7, 2019, one day after Jasmine Lovett and Aliyah Sanderson's bodies were found, Robert Leeming was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. Second-degree murder. Not manslaughter. Not a crime of passion. A charge that meant these killings weren't just random or accidental. There was intent. But even with the charges against him, there was something unsettling about the way he carried himself. He wasn't emotional. He didn't panic. He was cold. And when he finally spoke in court, his words shocked everyone. Robert Leeming sat before the judge, his face unreadable. Then, with a calm, deliberate voice, he made his plea. Not guilty to Aliyah Sanderson's death. The room fell silent. The child, the 22-month-old toddler, he was denying that he killed her. It was a claim that made no sense. Jasmine and Aliyah had been found together. Their injuries were nearly identical. They were last seen alive inside his house. And yet, Robert insisted that he only killed Jasmine. Why? What was his strategy? Was this an attempt to manipulate the system, hoping to reduce his sentence? Or was this yet another cruel way to control the narrative? The trial would be the only place to find answers. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the facts. They painted a clear picture of a man who was possessive, who had lost control, and who had tried to cover up his crimes. Witnesses were called, neighbors, friends, experts. They testified about the backyard fire, the odd behavior, the way Robert tried to pretend nothing had happened. Then there was the forensic evidence. The autopsy reports were damning. Both Jasmine and Aliyah had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. The injuries were deliberate, repeated, violent. Robert's claim that he didn't kill Aliyah made even less sense now. If he was capable of taking Jasmine's life, what was stopping him from harming the only witness? When Robert took the stand, his version of events was chilling. He admitted to killing Jasmine, but described it as if it were an accident, an argument that got out of hand. He claimed they had been drinking, and tempers flared. But when it came to Aliyah, he stuck to his denial. He insisted he didn't touch her, that she must have died some other way. The prosecution tore through his story. If he hadn't killed her, who did? There was no mystery intruder, no stranger in the night, no other explanation. The only person in that house with Jasmine and Aliyah was him, and the jury knew it. The deliberation didn't take long. Robert Leeming was found guilty of both murders. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was handed down. Life in prison. No possibility of parole for 22 years. For some, it was justice. For others, it wasn't nearly enough. A mother and child were gone forever. No sentence could change that. And Robert Leeming? For the first time since his arrest, his expression changed. Not anger. No remorse. Just the quiet realization that for the rest of his life, he would never walk free again. When Jasmine Lovett and Aliyah Sanderson were taken from this world, they left behind more than just memories. They left an emptiness that could never be filled. Jasmine's family, shattered by the loss, spoke through their grief. In a statement, they described how their lives had been devastated, and their hearts left heavy in ways they could never have imagined. A mother, a daughter, both gone in an act of cruelty that defied logic. Jasmine had dreams, hopes for a future with her daughter, for happiness, for love. Aliyah had barely begun her life. She was a child who should have been running through playgrounds, laughing without a care in the world. Instead, their futures had been erased. Calgary had followed every update in the case, hoping for a miracle. And when the truth was revealed, it sent a shockwave through the city. People who had never met Jasmine or Aliyah wept for them. Strangers felt the weight of what had been lost. Vigils were held. Candles lit. Flowers placed outside Jasmine's home. For many, it was more than just grief. It was anger. How could something like this happen? And how could no one have seen it coming? This wasn't just one tragedy. It was a story too many families had lived before. Jasmine and Aliyah weren't the first victims of domestic violence. And unless something changed, they wouldn't be the last. The signs were often there, subtle, ignored, dismissed. A controlling partner. A sudden withdrawal from friends. Excuses made for bruises, for missed calls, for canceled plans. But what if the community had seen it? What if someone had intervened earlier? Could things have been different? These were the questions people asked themselves as they mourned. Because this wasn't just about Jasmine and Aliyah anymore. This was about every woman, every child, every family that lived under the shadow of violence. The pain in the voices of Jasmine's loved ones, the heartbreak in every candle flickering at the vigils. It was a reminder that domestic violence is not just a private matter. It's a community issue, a societal issue. It's something that thrives in silence. And silence is exactly what allows it to continue. For those watching, those listening, this is not just a story. It's a lesson. Speak up. Pay attention. Don't ignore the signs. Because for some, a single moment of action could mean the difference between life and death. Jasmine Lovett and Aliyah Sanderson should have had long, happy lives. Jasmine, a devoted mother, had dreams for her future. Aliyah, just 22 months old, had her whole life ahead of her. Instead, their story ended in a way no one could have imagined, at the hands of someone they once trusted. We have walked through every step of this case. The backgrounds, the crime, the investigation, the trial, the aftermath. But in the end, this is not just a story about a terrible crime. This is about remembering them, not just as victims, but as a mother and daughter who were loved, who mattered, and who should still be here today. Their names should not only be associated with tragedy, but also with change. Their story is a painful reminder of the dangers of domestic violence, of the importance of paying attention to warning signs, and of speaking up before it's too late. Let's continue this conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What are your feelings about this case? What can we as a society do to prevent tragedies like this from happening again? Let's make sure Jasmine and Aliyah are never forgotten. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that Jasmine Lovett and Aliyah Sanderson's lives should be remembered, then let's keep this conversation going. Like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories. Stories that not only reveal the truth, but also spark real conversations about justice, safety, and awareness. But beyond that, consider taking action. There are organizations dedicated to preventing domestic violence and supporting victims. Places where those in danger can find help before it's too late. If you or someone you know is in a situation that feels unsafe, don't stay silent. Check the description for links to resources that offer support, shelter, and guidance for those in need. Even a small step, sharing these resources, spreading awareness, can make a difference. Let's remember Jasmine and Aliyah. Let's work toward a world where no more lives are lost to violence.